The cupbearer will replace them at her own wage. Vossler's voice carried the flat authority of a man who had been told what to say and had said it before. He stood at the head of the long table in the servants' hall, the ledger open against his chest like a shield, and he did not look at Mira. Not once. Every servant of the house was present. The kitchen girls sat with their hands folded around their spoons. The under-butler at the far end lifted his cup and set it down again without drinking. The lighting maid stared at the grain of the table as though she might read something useful in it. The fire settled in the grate with a sound like a held breath released. The Lady Imogen has reviewed the cellar accounts. 2 bottles of the 74 are missing. The cupbearer is responsible for the cellar. The cupbearer will replace them at her own wage. He read it twice, the repetition deliberate, the way a nail is struck twice to seat it. Not one face turned toward Mira. She sat at her place with her bread untouched, her sleeves rolled down over her wrists, and the wine she had poured for 5 seasons. Every vintage she had catalogued and tasted and logged in the ledger her mother had begun. None of it was in the room. Only the charge. The bread in her hands was cold. She had poured from those racks since she was old enough to reach the 3rd shelf, 12 years of sediment checked against lamplight, of wax seals tested with her thumb, of mornings in the cellar logging what had moved overnight. The stain on her fingertips was so deep, it no longer washed out. Her mother had carried the same dark on the same fingers until the last week, when she was too weak to work the rack. Mira did not speak. Her silence was the wound, and the room let it bleed without offering a cloth. Lady Imogen's drawing room, mid-morning. The lighting maid was on her knees at the hearth, relaying the fire. Mira stood 2 paces inside the door, hands at her sides, sleeves smoothed down. Imogen did not turn from the window. She spoke toward the glass, her voice carrying the particular quality of a woman who had learned that words traveled further when they were not aimed. Your mother served this house with discretion. You are not your mother. Discretion is a craft, girl. You have not learned it. Mira pressed the pad of her thumb against her forefinger, the gesture she used to test a wax seal, the muscle memory of 12 years, and waited. The cellar accounts are the cupbearer's record. The cupbearer's record shows a loss. The record I kept shows no loss, my lady. Then the record you kept is incomplete. Imogen turned from the window then. Her eyes moved past Mira to the maid at the hearth, a long, deliberate look that said, You have heard this, and you will remember it. The maid did not lift her head. Her brush against the grate was the only sound. Mira did not move from where she stood. The words were already on their way to the kitchen, the corridor outside the cellar, the start of her afternoon shift. She saw the lock before she reached the door. A new plate, a new mechanism, the old keyhole filled with lead. Vossler was already there, the under-butler coming up the corridor behind him with a loaded tray. Vossler did not lower his voice. You will pour from the bottles I bring up. The cellar is no longer your concern. Take this and do not use it for anything but the door. He held out the new key. Mira took it. The metal was warm from his hand, the particular warmth of something that had been held too long by someone who did not belong to it. The lady has arranged the selection for this week's table. You will be informed of the bottles each morning. And the morning log? The inventory? The inventory is the steward's concern now. The under-butler's tray did not rattle, but his pace did not quicken either. He passed them with his eyes forward, the careful, deliberate blindness of a man who had understood that what he was witnessing was not something he was permitted to witness. Mira closed her hand around the new key. The old lock plate lay on the floor beside the door, already discarded. Her mother's key had fit that lock for 40 years. She let herself into the cellar and pulled the door closed behind her in the dark. She did not light the lamp. She stood with her forehead pressed against the wood of the rack nearest the door. The oak was cold and smelled of the same wine she had catalogued every morning for 5 seasons, the same wine her mother had catalogued before her. Her shoulders did not shake. Her hands did. She turned one hand palm up in the dark and looked at it, though she could not see it. She knew what was there. The stain along the fingertips, the same dark her mother had carried on the same fingers until the end. She closed the hand into a fist until the shaking slowed. Then she ran her fingertip along the dust on the cellar shelf beside her. Slowly, the full length of the third board, and stopped where the dust had been wiped recently. Wiped by a hand that did not know how the dust should sit after a bottle was drawn. Too clean, too wide. The mark of someone who had taken 2 bottles and tried to erase the taking. She lit the lamp. She began to inventory the rack by feel and by eye, the way her mother had taught her, starting at the lowest board and working up. She did not hurry. The lamp made one small circle of light in the dark, and she worked inside it. The morning after the lock was changed, Mira found the household already preparing for Lady Imogen's monthly dinner. Vossler set the bottle on the decanting table in the pantry and left without ceremony. Mira pressed the wax seal with her thumb. The seal broke with a dry resistance, and beneath the wine there was a faint mineral edge. Silver, the smell her mother's palate had named once and never named again. She set the bottle down with both hands. She did not move for a moment. Then she went to the back corridor, to the loose stone behind the third rack, and drew out the bottle her mother had hidden there in her last season. She decanted it. That evening she carried the master's cup to the dining room. Vossler announced the bottle as she approached the table. From the 74, as the lady selected, the master will be served from this bottle and no other. Mira poured from her own decanter without altering her pace. The wine in the cup was clean. She had tasted it, a quarter turn of the glass against the lamp, the sediment checked, and there was nothing in it but the grape and the year. She set the cup at the master's place. The candles in the dining room guttered when Aldrich entered, all of them at once, as though the air had shifted. The hounds at the door pressed flat to the floor as he passed. Mira stood at her station and did not look up. His footsteps on the stone floor were inhumanly quiet. She had to track him by the guttering of the candles, by the way the hounds breathed differently when he was near. The cellar that Mira had inherited from her mother held its silence the way the vampire king upstairs held his, without speaking, without moving, until the moment for moving came. The shadows in the cellar racks settled into the gap where the 2 74 bottles should have been, dark before her lamp reached the spot. Aldrich took the cup. His fingers brushed the back of her hand as she released it. The cold of stone left out overnight in winter, colder than the wine, colder than the room. His hand on the cup was the cold of something immortal handed an offering by a mortal hand and accepting it without altering its temperature. He drank, set the cup down. The candle nearest him bent slightly away from his hand, the flame leaning as though from a source of cold rather than heat. You poured from the decanter, not the bottle. The bottle had settled unevenly in transit, my lord. The decanter was cleaner. And the bottle Vossler brought? It is on the side table, my lord, untouched. Leave it there. Mira answered in the careful monosyllables of a servant who had learned that the master's questions were not always questions. Aldrich did not pursue it. He lifted the cup and drank again. She watched the flame lean from the corner of her eye and did not let herself watch it directly. After the guests left, she found the bottle Vossler had brought in the cellar, empty. She had not poured it. She did not know who had. The empty bottle sat on the cellar shelf where she had not placed it, its mouth still wet, and Mira did not touch it. She locked the cellar with the new key, the one that fit wrong in her hand, too warm, too smooth, and walked the back corridor to her room. She did not sleep. She lay with her palms open on the coverlet and felt the mineral edge of the silver still sitting at the back of her palate, like a word she had not yet said aloud. Lady Imogen intercepted her in the corridor outside the dining room the following morning. She did not raise her voice. She had a letter in her hand, folded but not sealed, and she held it the way a person holds a thing they want seen before it is read. The magistrate's office keeps thorough records of household staff. Charges of theft, dismissed or otherwise, are noted in the register. "I have not been charged with theft, my lady. You have been docked for a loss. The distinction is administrative." Imogen turned the letter once between her fingers. "Mr. Fern is a careful man. A written statement once filed cannot be easily unfiled. You understand what that means for a cupbearer seeking a new post." "I understand that a cupbearer who has kept a true count for 5 seasons has a record of her own, my lady. Records can be contested. Statements from a steward carry more weight than a servant's ledger." Imogen tucked the letter into her sleeve. Her voice carried the particular softness of a woman who has already won and is now performing the courtesy of explaining how. "The new cupbearer arrives in the village at the end of the month. I trust the transition will be orderly." She walked away. Her footsteps were sharp on the stone floor, confident, evenly spaced. Mira stood in the corridor and did not move until the sound of them had gone entirely. The shadow along the wainscoting was colder than the air around it. She noticed this the way she noticed sediment in a glass, automatically, without choosing to, and it did not move when she moved. Old Hesper's still room smelled of dried lavender and something sharper underneath, a mordant edge that Mira's palate registered before her mind named it. The room was small and crowded with bundles and jars. Hesper stood at the work table with her back to the door, sorting a bundle of dried herbs with hands that moved as though they were counting something only she could feel. "You changed the bottle last night." Mira stopped 2 paces inside the door. "I decanted from the reserve." "Your mother kept that reserve for a reason." Hesper did not turn. Her voice was the voice of someone who speaks rarely and has learned to spend each word like coin. "Did she tell you the reason?" "She told me to keep it and not speak of it." Wise woman. Hesper's hands went still over the bundle. "What did your palate tell you about the bottle Vossler brought?" Mira described the mineral edge, dry, faint, sitting at the back of the palate, the way silver sits in old wine when it has been added slowly over many pourings. She pressed her thumb against the inside of the doorframe as she spoke, the old gesture of testing a surface, and the wood was cool beneath her skin. Hesper set the bundle down. She did not turn around. "Come back tonight, after the household is quiet. Bring nothing with you." "What will you show me?" "What your mother could not show you before she died." Hesper's shoulders shifted beneath her shawl, a small adjustment that carried the weight of something long held. "The wine you have been pouring has a name for what is in it, girl. I have known that name for more than a year." "Then why have you not spoken?" because speaking it to the wrong ear is what your mother did, and your mother is in the ground. The still room was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the garden, and the lavender shifted in the draught from the door, and nothing else moved. Mira smoothed her sleeve down over her wrist, the linen damp from the morning's work, and left without another word. The wine she had been pouring for 5 seasons had a name for what was in it. Hesper had known that name, and the knowledge sat in Mira's chest like a seal pressed into warm wax. The still room after midnight held only one candle and the smell of old herbs gone dry. Hesper set a small glass tube on the work table between them. Dark liquid, a finger's width, drawn from a half-empty bottle Imogen had left on the sideboard 3 weeks ago. She held it against the candle flame. The liquid caught the light with a faint, iridescent edge, the color of something that should not be in wine. "What does your palate say?" "Silver. Tincture of silver in old wine. Slow acting." "How long has it been in the bottles?" "Long enough that I did not smell it the first week I held the post. Longer than that." Hesper set the tube down. She did not take it back. Her fingers rested on the work table, the nails bitten short and stained with years of herb work. "The Vampire King has known what is in his wine since the first night you poured it clean. He has not drunk a poisoned cup in 5 seasons. He has been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Hesper looked at her for a long moment. The candle flame did not move. For someone who would know it without being told. The silence in the room was the silence of a thing that had been held a long time and was now being set down. Mira pressed the heel of her hand against the work table edge and felt the grain of the wood against her palm. "You said the Vampire King. You are telling me what he is." "I am telling you what you already know. You have felt his hand on the cup. You have stood in the cellar at midnight and felt the cold that is not the cold of stone. An immortal does not drink wine for the taste, girl. He drinks it because a mortal hand poured it, and that hand was clean." Hesper poured 2 cups of cold water from the pitcher on the shelf, not tea, not wine, water, and set one in front of Mira. "Your mother knew what was in the wine. She died of a fever. She died of refusing to pour what she knew was poisoned. The physician named it a fever because the physician was Vossler's cousin." Hesper's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I tended her. I know what silver does to a body over time." "How long have you known this?" "Since the week she died." "Why did you not speak?" "I had no witness who could survive saying it. Now I do." Mira's hand on the cup of water did not shake. She lifted it and set it down without drinking, the way she set a decanter on a shelf. Both hands, deliberate, the motion of someone who has been trained not to spill. Hesper told her the rest without pausing. The replacement cup-bearer arriving in the village in 3 days. Imogen's false statement from Vossler about the manner of her mother's passing, filed with the magistrate's clerk as leverage. The old key, her mother's key, the one Imogen had quietly recovered when the lock was changed, held in Imogen's keeping as a symbol of the post itself. "If that statement reaches Mr. Fern's register, the Auvergne name is finished in service within 50 miles, Hesper said. "Imogen does not need to prove theft. She needs only to attach the name to enough paper that no household will risk the hiring." "And the glass tube? The tincture you drew from the bottle? That is your weapon. But a weapon without a witness is a curiosity. With a witness, it is a charge. Who would witness against the lady of this house?" Hesper picked up the glass tube and held it to the candle one more time. The iridescent edge caught the light and held it. The under-butler watched Vossler hand you the new key and said nothing. The lighting maid heard Imogen call you undisciplined and carried the words to the kitchen by midday. The kitchen girl moved her spoon through her porridge and did not look at you. They all watched. They all remember. They were afraid. They were waiting for the same thing the master was waiting for. Someone who would know it without being told, and say it where it could be heard. Mira did not speak. Her sleeve was still damp at the wrist from washing her hands before she came. She smoothed it down over the stained skin, the linen pressing against the 12-year darkness on her fingertips, and she listened to the candle burn. She walked back to the cellar after the still room. She carried the knowledge of the glass tube, the knowledge of her mother, the knowledge of what she had been pouring against for 5 seasons without knowing she was pouring against it. She went to the basin at the cellar door and washed her hands. Once. Twice. The wine stain on her fingertips did not come out. It never came out. It was 12 years deep. But she washed them anyway, the cold water over the stained skin, and the smell of silver and old wine came up from the basin in the warmth of her own hands. She pressed her palms flat against the wooden counter and stared at them. Her eyes filled. She pressed the heels of her hands against the counter edge until the pressure traveled up her arms and the tears did not fall. They were there. She could feel them. But she did not let them fall because she had not yet decided what she was going to do, and she would not weep before she had decided. She stood like that for a long time. The candle on the shelf burned down 1/4 of an inch. She did not move. She thought of her mother's hands on the same racks, the same stain on the same fingers, the same trained palate that had known the mineral edge of silver in old wine and refused the cup and died of refusing it. She thought of 5 seasons. She thought of the master's hand on the cup. Cold, always cold, the cold of something that had waited 300 years for a particular kind of witness. She did not move until the candle guttered in its own wax. Then she took a lamp and walked the cellar at midnight. She needed to know what was still there, what had been moved, what the racks could tell her that Vossler's ledger could not. The shadows along the racks were colder than the air around them. She had noticed this before and dismissed it, but tonight she did not dismiss it. They did not move when she moved. She held the lamp to the 3rd rack and spoke aloud, barely above a breath, the name of what her mother had died of. Silver. The shadows moved, not toward her, not away. They shifted, the way a person shifts weight from one foot to the other when they have been standing still too long. The lamp flame bent away from the foot of the cellar stairs, away from the darkness at the bottom of the steps, as though something stood there that the flame did not want to approach. Mira did not run. She turned the glass 1/4 in her hand against the lamp, the old gesture, the trade gesture, and looked at the foot of the stairs. Nothing visible. But the cold was specific and directional, and she had a trained palate. She knew the difference between the cold of stone and the cold of something that had been standing still for a very long time. She carried her lamp back to the racks and finished the inventory. Her hand was steady by the time she reached the last board. Her hand was steady because she had decided. She carried the bottle up from the cellar herself. The morning light had not yet reached the kitchen corridor, but Mira's hands knew the weight of glass in the dark, the way they knew the weight of a full decanter. By the shift in her wrist, by the pull against the stained skin of her fingers. She set the bottle on the decanting table in the pantry and pressed the wax seal with her thumb. The mineral edge was there, silver beneath the wine, faint and patient, the compound that had been killing her line for 3 generations. She did not swap it. She did not hide it. She decanted it into the master's cup with the full ceremony of her post. The half-turn of the cloth on the rim, the glass held to the lamp, the sediment checked and noted. The wine caught the lamplight with the same iridescent edge Hesper's glass tube had shown her in the still room. She set the cup on her tray and walked to the dining room. The household was assembled. The kitchen girls stood at the sideboard. The lighting maid attended the sconces along the far wall. The under-butler held his position near the corridor entrance. Vossler stood beside the door, his coat buttoned to the throat, his face carrying the particular blankness of a man who has been told what to say and is waiting to say it. Lady Imogen sat at the left of the master's place, her chatelaine keys resting on the linen beside her plate. Her posture was the posture of a woman who expected the evening to confirm what her letters had already arranged. The vampire king sat at the head of the table. He held his stillness the way the cellar held its cold, completely, without effort, as a thing that has always been that way. The candles guttered when he had entered, all of them at once, and the hounds at the door had pressed flat to the floor. Now the flames leaned slightly away from his end of the table. The breath of every servant near the head fogged faintly in air that should not have been cold enough for fogging. Mira set the cup before him. His fingers closed around the stem. The cold of his hand reached her knuckles before he touched the cup. The cold of something immortal accepting an offering from a mortal hand. He did not drink. He set the cup down. He looked at Lady Imogen across the table. The lady selected this vintage herself. I ask her to drink first, in honor of the selection. Imogen's hand went to the stem of her own glass, empty, and then stopped. I am not thirsty. It is a courtesy, cousin. The household is watching. I said I am not thirsty. Aldrich lifted the cup. The candlelight bent away from his hand as though the flame itself did not want to be near what was inside. Then I will drink for both of us. He poured the wine very slowly onto the white linen of the table. The cloth burned where the wine touched it. Not immediately, not like fire, but steadily. The weave darkening and then parting, a black ring eating through the cloth and into the wood beneath. The sound was the sound of linen dying, a soft, dry whisper, the fibers separating, the table underneath accepting the stain with a hiss that was almost a word. The room did not make a sound. The servants at the sideboard, the lighting maid at the sconce, Mira at her station. No one spoke. The shadow of the wine ring on the linen was darker than the candelabra light should have allowed. Darker than any shadow in the room, a circle of darkness that did not move when the candles moved. Cold in the dining room, sharp enough that breath fogged at the head of the table where it had not before. Imogen did not plead. She did not apologize. She pushed back her chair and refused the cup with her silence, and that refusal was her last act in the dining room. She stood, and the chatelaine keys swung against the edge of the table with a sound like a small bell struck once. She walked toward the door without looking at anyone. Mira watched the black ring eating through the linen and pressed the cloth against the rim of the decanter in her hand. Half-turn, steady, the trade gesture that held her in her body when her body wanted to leave the room. The silver in that wine had been meant for the master's cup. It had been meant for his cup every night for 5 seasons. And every night for 5 seasons she had poured from her own decanter instead, and he had known, and he had waited. The morning after, Aldrich walked into the servants' hall at the same hour. With the same servants at the same long table, with Vossler standing at attention beside the door. Aldrich carried 2 bottles of the 74 himself, one in each hand, the glass catching the gray light from the high windows. He set them on the table in front of Mira's place without ceremony. They were never missing. They were taken from the cellar by the lady's hand and placed in her own room. The cupbearer kept the count true. The steward did not. He turned to the room. The kitchen girl who had moved her spoon through her porridge on the morning of the first wound looked at Mira directly. The under-butler at the far end set down his cup and did not pick it up again. The steward Vossler is discharged from this household as of this morning. His name is entered in the discharge book with the household's seal. The dock from the cupbearer's wage is reversed. The coin has not left her purse. Vossler at the door did not speak. He was already holding his coat. His face carried no expression at all. The blankness had become permanent, the way a mask becomes a face when it is worn long enough. Mira looked at the 2 bottles standing on the table in front of her place. The glass was dusty. The labels were in her mother's hand. The careful, small script that had catalogued every vintage in the cellar for 40 years. She pressed her thumb against the wax seal of the nearest bottle, the old gesture, and the seal was intact. It had never been opened. The bottles stood on the table like a ledger corrected in ink that does not smear. The same lighting maid who had knelt at the hearth in Imogen's drawing room carried Imogen's discharge papers to her room before sunrise. The household corridor was full of servants when Imogen walked out. The same kitchen that had heard the words by midday was the same kitchen that watched her leave. Mira stood at the cellar door in her work apron. She did not look up as Imogen passed. Imogen looked at her, a long, measured look, the look of a woman calculating whether there was still a move to be made and finding none. Mira did not look back. The maid handed the papers and did not bow. By order of the master, out of the estate by sunrise, the household is not yours. Imogen took the papers. Her fingers were white around the edges. She walked past the kitchen, past the corridor where she had intercepted Mira with the magistrate's letter, past the cellar door where the new lock plate gleamed in the early light. The servants in the corridor did not part for her the way they would have yesterday. Mira turned the glass a quarter in her hand. The old gesture, the trade gesture, the one her mother taught her, and did not raise her eyes. Old Hesper stood in the doorway of the still room at the corridor's end and watched Imogen go. She did not say anything. She did not need to. But when Imogen had passed, Hesper looked at Mira across the length of the corridor and gave a single nod. The nod of a woman who has held a secret for more than a year and has just watched it become unnecessary. The cellar corridor was quiet after the household settled. Aldrich walked down the stairs with Mira. The same corridor, the same lock, now mounted with a new plate. The under-butler was at the corridor's end and stopped when the master appeared. The lantern flame bent away from Aldrich at the foot of the stairs. The cold that surrounded him was the cold she had felt every evening for 5 seasons. The cold of his hand on the cup, the cold of the shadows along the racks, the cold of something that had stood at the foot of those stairs in the darkness and watched her work by lamplight and said nothing. "You knew," Mira said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "Since the first night you poured it clean." His voice carried the quality of something that has been quiet for a very long time and is not accustomed to the sound of itself. "I have waited 5 seasons for someone who would know it without being told. My mother knew it, and she died. Your mother refused the cup and did not tell me why. By the time I understood, The physician had already signed the paper. He did not move from the foot of the stairs. The lantern flame between them bent steadily away from him, a small cone of warmth that could not reach where he stood. I could not undo what had been done to her. I could protect what she left behind. You protected me by letting me pour poison every night and never telling me what I was pouring against. I protected you by drinking only what your hands poured. Your footsteps in the corridor have been known to me by heart since the second week of your first season. I could distinguish your step from any other servant's at 30 paces. I have tracked you by sound through every floor of this house for 5 years, because you were the only hand in it that was not carrying something meant to end me. Mira held the decanter still. The wine in it was steady. Her hand was not. She set the decanter on the shelf with more care than she had ever set anything down. Both hands the way she was taught. The way her mother set things down in the last weeks when her hands shook too. She turned. Her face was wet. She did not feel the tears begin. They were simply there. On her face, the way the wine stain was on her fingers. Something that had been accumulating for a long time and had arrived without announcement. She pressed her stained fingertips against her own collarbone. The wine on her fingers left a mark on her linen collar. She did not wipe it. She stood without moving in the cellar that had been killing her line for 3 generations. She did not speak, and he did not move from the foot of the stairs. He saw her broken. He did not rescue. He stood still at the foot of the stairs, the lantern flame bending away from him, and he witnessed. The shadows along the racks settled around them both, not threatening, not retreating, simply present. The way the cold was present, the way the silence was present. She breathed. He did not. The cellar held them both. Then Aldrich took from his coat the old key. Her mother's key. The one Imogen had quietly recovered when the lock was changed, and Aldrich quieter still recovered from Imogen. The metal was dark with age and use, worn smooth at the bow, where her mother's thumb had pressed it 1,000 times. He held it out. Then he took the new key from his other hand. Bright brass, unworn, the teeth still sharp. He pressed both into her palm. Both are yours. You decide which lock holds. The cellar is yours. The post is yours. The name Auvergne stays in this house as long as the house stands. And if I stay, Mira said, I stay knowing what you are, what the Vampire King is, what the shadows in this cellar do when I speak. You stay knowing everything. No more silence between us. No more silence, she said. The under-butler at the corridor's end did not move. He was the same officer who had watched Vossler hand her the smaller key to the smaller version of her own post. He watched the master press 2 keys into her palm. He did not look away. Mira closed her fingers around both keys. The old one was cold. Cold the way the cellar was cold, the way the master's hand was cold, the cold of something that had been waiting a long time to be returned. The new one was warm from his coat, still carrying the heat of wherever he had kept it close. She held them both, the cold and the warm, the old and the new, and the weight of them together was the weight of a thing decided. She did not speak. The cellar was hers. The post was hers. The name Auvergne stayed.